Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to bring you this conversation with the amazing Scilla Elworthy. Get comfortable with conflict. What I did with my book chapters of Collaborative Hardball is basically each chapter is trying to articulate an aspect of what it means to negotiate and resolve conflict more from bringing forth the feminine in balance with the masculine. And the podcast episodes, as you know, are filling out each of those chapters, not repeating them, but really enriching them with conversations with some amazing people. So Zilla will talk to us about what it means to get comfortable with conflict. And she has worked in some of the most intense war zones and high-level situations. This is a message, I think, getting comfortable with conflict, that is especially important for the female half of humanity. Carol Gilligan, the Harvard theorist long ago, summarized that, and I've repeated it many times, that patriarchy created a violence in men and silence in women, which of course hasn't worked for any of us. And both men and women, people need to rewind that message, that acculturation. Conflict obviously is not a bad thing, but how we deal with it can be horrible. This is particularly true. I mean, conflict is not going away. It's been a growth industry for a long time. And this is especially true now as the Earth's margins are getting strained by greedy billionaires, now trillionaires, who are not understanding how they're contributing to humanity and the planet. And we, people, have not yet gathered the political will to stop them. This is increasingly important, I believe, for women to get that political will. Not that we are unique, but just simply that silence of our past is going away and needs, I think we're getting louder, and I think we need to get louder and more skilled even still. So I spoke to Scilla in 2018 on the Peacebuilding Podcast, and then I am speaking again to her here. I started this conversation with a reflection on what has happened in those 8 years since 2018. You know, both the glass half empty parts, which are depressing or can be depressing, they are depressing, and the glass filling up parts, which are exciting and motivating. A lot of really wonderful things are happening. So about Scilla, she is a 3 times Nobel Peace Prize nominee for her work with the Oxford Research Group to develop effective dialogue between nuclear weapons policymakers worldwide and their critics. She founded Peace Direct to fund, promote, and learn from local peace builders in conflict areas. She founded the Business Plan for Peace to help prevent violent conflict and build sustainable peace. She co-founded Rising Women, Rising World, FemQ in 2016 to establish the qualities of feminine intelligence for women and men as essential to use in building a safer world. She has been working recently on how women leaders stop wars, and on and on. She is an amazing force, has been an inspiration to so many of us, and I will put her full bio in the show notes. So this is a practical, highly practical, and very profound conversation using breath, listening, and courage in face of some of the most threatening conflict situations. I know you will find it useful to focus on it for our brief conversation. Thank you so much for listening, and I bring you Scilla Elworthy. Hello, it's so nice to see you.
And you, Susan.
Yes.
Tell me a tiny bit about yourself just before we start, because I don't know about you.
Well, let's see. What could I tell you about me? I've been in this field for a long time. The field I guess I would call peace and conflict, negotiation, mediation, whatever you might want to call it. I was trained as a lawyer, but I wasn't that thrilled with the whole process of litigation. I also wanted to have a family. I ended up having 2 children. What else could I tell you about me? I'm a risk taker. But yeah, I guess I would say that I'm somebody who, from the age of, I think I can trace it to the age of about 10,
Mhm.
maybe 12. I read All Quiet on the Western Front when I was a really young kid. And it really, I
Yeah.
guess it really moved me. And I traced my activism from then. And then, of course, I was born in 1955. I
Mhm.
grew up during the time of the American Vietnam War.
Mhm.
It was being broadcast to all of us as we sat around eating dinner with our parents, and that really shaped me. And it shaped pretty much every choice that I made, I would say.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think I've been pretty focused on that throughout my life, even though I'm not sure I always took the best route, but I didn't do badly. I've made a number of big swings towards a more just world.
Mhm.
I set up the UN's conflict resolution program.
I thought you did that.
Yeah. And rolled that around the world. It was an internal conflict, but we did both. It was a big initiative. And I went to pretty much all duty stations around the world. I went to a lot of war zones,
Mm.
been to a lot of peacekeeping missions. And I also come from a family has also shaped me probably a lot, as our families tend to. I come from a colonial family. I was born in New York City. My I am a direct descendant of Peter Stuyvesant, who was the first
Sure.
governor of New York. I think I'm his 11th great granddaughter or what number it might be. And I had never felt mixed about that. I think he was quite the slave trader, but my daughter, who is gay, queer identified, thinks that he also maybe was queer himself. And I don't know, you never know. He obviously it was during his tenure that New York shifted from being New Amsterdam to being New York. And my family goes right back. But then, of course, I live in a place that I was just talking about it, it's been shaped first by a mile high of ice 15,000 years ago to 12,000 years ago, Native
Mm.
Americans living here, to Europeans pretty much disenfranchising Indigenous people of their land and pushing them west. The descendants now are in Wisconsin.
Hence the work that you do now.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Well done.
yeah.
Maximum respect.
Well, and the reason, as I thought it was so interesting, Scilla, when I looked back on, I don't know if you remember this, but I interviewed you 8 years ago. I had a podcast called the Peacebuilding Podcast,
Mm.
and it focused on interventions to build
Mm.
common ground because I had done some pretty interesting work using open space to resolve conflict, using lots of different large group facilitation methods. Anyway, I interviewed you exactly almost to the day 8 years ago.
Oh, I
And
do remember it vaguely, but my memory's not so good now, so I haven't got a clear picture of it.
well, that's okay. You can get rid of things that you don't want to remember or
No, no.
something like that. But anyway, I thought it made me reflect
Mm.
on what's happened over the last 8 years, because
Mm.
for me, it was a great conversation. Since then, I've written a
Mm.
book called Collaborative Hardball, which hopefully I was so irritated. I sent you a copy with, at great expense with our stupid postal service. And you said you never got it. I did send you the PDF, so I think you got that. So,
Yes, I have access to the PDF.
this is what I thought about when I thought about the 8 years ago. I first thought about like all the bleak stuff. And when I wrote the book, I had scanned the planet and said, well, okay, what stands out to me? And it was a rapidly heating planet, the doomsday clock clicking ever closer to midnight, the struggle between democracy and authoritarianism, and the persistent gender inequality, racial inequality, income inequality.
Mhm.
I didn't mention AI at that moment because AI was just beginning. Even 8 years ago, it wasn't what it is now.
Mm.
And I said in the book what connects these things is what I called a patriarchal world culture. And I know you didn't love that phrase, patriarchy, but anyway, I think you certainly know what I'm talking about.
I do.
And so using those criteria, I think, okay, what's happened in the last 8 years? There have been Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Gaza, the wider Middle East. Billionaires have now become trillionaires. The rapidly accelerating impact of climate of a planet, misogyny, sexual violence, racism, the Epstein files, the manosphere becoming very present to all of us, AI, this power over paradigm, whatever, showing itself. So, of course, it's really easy to get upset. But then I, give the floor to you. But I just thought I would start this way because then, of course, there are many amazing things that have been happening. And so I want to talk about those too, because I know you and I both know the power of focusing on strength and what's happening that's working. So these were the things that I identified, that patriarchy is becoming much easier to see. It used to be a word that I even didn't want to say. Now it seems to be all over the place. Even mainstream media, they talk about the patriarchy and it's like, oh my God, okay, things have changed. There's much more evidence of how much women's presence contributes to both peace, thanks to a lot of the work that you've done, to a sustainable future, to regenerativity, and just how critical that is. The power of Indigenous voices growing all over the planet. And I think a shifting awareness that we are nature, we're not separate from nature. And that's like one of the messages I'm constantly hearing from Indigenous voices, we are still here. And by the way, human beings are nature, that solar and wind are rapidly undermining fossil fuels, in spite of big oil's election of Donald Trump and their just unbelievable evil pursuit of getting their oil out of the ground in spite of what it's doing to the planet. But I think maybe we have the Iran situation to thank for increase in the recognition of the power of wind and solar, that people are much greater understanding about trauma than ever before and the recycling effects of trauma, that queer and non-binary people are very much more present as they always have been, but they're showing up.
Now they're being recognized, yes.
And I'm almost done with this list, that young men, but men in general, I think, are much more emotionally literate than the men in my father's generation and my brother.
Some massive exceptions that are.
With some massive exceptions. Yeah, I mean, of course, we are being inundated by very childish billionaire trillionaires, and that women are not having it. I mean, it's interesting. I was getting my hair cut a while ago, and the topic of the Epstein files came up, and across the board, all these different women, the hair washers, the hairdressers, that like very working class, very, like for people that had more money, everybody was like, we are not having this. So it was just like, I think in general, women are, and men are not having this. It's, in short, the old power story, I think, is really breaking apart in spite of the fact that it's also really trying to assert itself simultaneously.
Yes.
So, what I asked you to talk about, but I want you to talk about whatever you want to talk about. But the launch or the touchstone was getting comfortable with conflict, the need to get comfortable with conflict, and particularly maybe the need for women to get particularly comfortable with conflict, because patriarchy has been violent. And I think women have been frightened by it, rightfully so, but we need strength, we need clarity, and we need to get comfortable with it. So
I hope to embellish what you're saying with a number of examples.
Yeah. So please.
I think the interesting question that you put to me was, how do women use the power of negotiation to change the world? And what matters, obviously, is how we deal with conflicts, that can arise from scarce resources, injustice, harassment, greed, insult, injury. And then faced with conflict, we can choose between two strategies, main strategies of negotiation, either competition or collaboration. Now, competition usually exacerbates, in my experience, the division, the greed, the insult, the injury, all the things that happen when people feel unheard. Whereas collaboration, which sounds rather good, it requires something really difficult, that we listen for the needs of the other person. And that's difficult to do when you are in a conflict. And that we, as you've said earlier, we communicate non-aggressively. And that's doubly hard when the other person is bullying or threatening or constantly interrupting. And as you know, and I know, many women and girls worldwide have been and are being reared in powerlessness. It's very challenging for them to develop any authority or even find their voice. So schools and educators can spend valuable time coaching young women to express themselves and to express their needs clearly and calmly as their right. So how do we do this? Well, you're going to be surprised by this one. My absolute key to authority is to breathe when you're in a difficult situation, because this immediately centers your body and allows you to straighten up instead of crouching anxiously. And the breathing gives you practice with your teachers, practice with your family, but to actually practice the ability to breathe when things are tough. It sounds easy, but it's not.
And of course, you even say that, and of course, I start breathing more deeply, which I think is
right. Well, it gives us a different dimension. And the second key to authority will surprise you even more. And this is in an argument, it is to listen. Why should you listen to a bully, somebody who's shouting at you or bullying you? Your attention and your ability then calmly to repeat back what you've heard will knock the socks off everyone. Here's somebody talking at you aggressively, insulting you, undermining you, and you repeat back what you've heard and possibly what you've felt. And that changes the atmosphere completely from harassment and shouting to, oh, what did he say? What did she say? So this can open the way to you, as the recipient of this aggressivity, to being able to state calmly how you see the picture. You've opened the space for yourself. The other person has had their space. And people will be listening to you by now because you're interesting and your voice is calm and it's got authority. So if I may, let me tell you a true story.
Please.
In the 1990s, I led a delegation of British military leaders to talk to their opposite numbers in China. This had never happened before. At the first meeting, the Chinese general on the other side of the table, who was leading his men, all very high-ranking men, and he was talking and talking very rapidly, and the interpreters, bless them, couldn't keep up. He clearly intended to lead the entire discussion. So my delegation was understanding nothing, zero, hopeless. I realized someone had to say something, and that someone was me. So I cleared my throat and I said, our delegates very much wish to respond to what he'd said. He was incandescent with rage. I don't think he'd ever been interrupted. And he was banging the table and shouting. I thought, oh dear, caused an international incident. And then he continued with his speech. So I thought, what do I do now? So I nudged the admiral on my right in my team to ask a question, which, bless him, he did, announcing it as an exchange of views. And then everything changed because our group were having a chance to speak, to ask questions, and the general was allowing some of his underlings to speak as well. So at dinner time, I was seated next to this general, and I learned that he'd led Chinese troops in wars for 40 years of his military career, hardly ever seeing his family.
Wow.
I listened with care, and I said how much I felt for his suffering, for not being able to see his family grow up. He stopped talking and he looked at me. He saw a person and not an enemy, not somebody he had to beat. And he began to say more about the suffering of himself and his men. He went pale and tears came down his face. This general, I don't think he'd ever been seen with tears on his face. And I was absolutely amazed. Everybody was sort of,
So other people were noticing it as well.
Everybody could see this. So what he did then, which was wonderful, he called for the waiter and ordered a cake to celebrate our understanding. I was amazed, completely amazed.
Sorry, where was this happening? I think you said, but no, I don't.
In Beijing.
In Beijing, okay.
In China. And we'd had a previous thing to this, which might also amuse your listeners, that when we first arrived, we touched down and we were expecting to be able to go and rest at the hotel. Not a bit of it. We were expected in the Great Hall of the People. I don't know if have you been to China?
I've been to Shanghai.
Been to Shanghai. Well, the Great Hall of the People is what you'd imagine, huge. We had to be there in half an hour. So we rushed to the hotel, changed, and turned up. And we were walking up this hall, which was, I don't know, the side, probably the width of the Empire State Building. I don't know. It was very, very big. And I was accompanied by a general, an admiral, an air vice marshal, and the other military that I'd persuaded to come with me. And our host walked towards us very grandly, put out his hand to the general on my right and said, "Dr. Elworthy, I presume?" So the last thing he'd expected was a woman. And that made everybody laugh. So it softened the atmosphere at least. So I do always fall back when I remember to, in an argument, when things are tough with family or with colleagues even, just to allow my body to move and to stretch, and breathing, as you just said, allows that. It enables that, if you like. And you can be your full real self. And then what will come out of your mouth is true, or much more true in my experience than a simple speech, because you'll be connecting with those that you want to reach.
At a human level. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there any follow-up? So he started at the dinner, he turned to ash and started to cry. And anything after that?
He rather quickly ordered cake.
Oh, yeah, that's right. You said ordered cake. Yeah.
He ordered cake and everybody had cake, and there was some kind of toasting of him, which was good because he recovered his posture, his persona. But I'll never forget this man's face and his talking about his war experiences and the agony of not being able to see his children grow up. So he became a human to me. And at the same time, I became a human to him instead of this tiresome, uppity woman from London.
So Scilla, one of the things, so in terms of getting comfortable with conflict, one of the things you're talking about is the power of breath as a starting place. And then the power of listening. And I think you've spoken a lot on the power of listening and the power of the heart in listening. And I will say, one of the things I say in my book is that an aspect of this that maybe a nuance is that sometimes women can, I think, over listen too, because we don't really know how to focus on ourselves sometimes and get our own needs met and bring them into the conversation. And I wonder if you have any comments about that, about what is really good listening and what you might consider over listening.
Well, really good listening to me is that I focus and put my eyes on the person who's speaking, and I try to really understand where his or her speech is coming from, especially if it's controversial or argumentative or even angry.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just ask for a moment. I said, could I have a moment? Let me feed back to you what I think you've said, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. And as you will know, that changes things, because if they have to hear in their head what they've said, sometimes they're very embarrassed by it and they didn't want to scream or shout.
Mm-hmm.
And so that shifts it a little. Rather than my interrupting him or her with my truth and my righteousness, I'm inviting him or her to hear themselves. And then the opportunity arises to pick up something that they've said, which was helpful or controversial, and open it up to the group, so that I'm not stealing his thunder. I'm rather allowing his bon mot, his wisdom, if it was wise, rarely so, to be forefront or for people to discuss it. So it does lead to more of an even atmosphere in the way voices are heard or not heard.
Yeah, it's certainly, if you do want your voice to be heard, of course, one of the best ways to get there is to first hear theirs and hear it well.
Yeah, exactly.
And I wonder, I sometimes think there's, in listening, particularly in conflict, that I'm listening for needs, not for positions. Because I think sometimes if I'm listening at the positional level, like what they want, I might reinforce it in a way that doesn't really help. But if I am able to go to a deeper level of what they really are needing, what their interests are, and sometimes what they're feeling, can be a little tricky depending on who you're talking to. Some people don't like you to expose or come up with what you think their feelings are. But sometimes it's really powerful to do that. That adds an element of good listening, and that I think leaves room for a negotiation to occur, because at the level of interests and needs, there isn't necessarily polarization. At the level of position, there probably is.
Yes. And also, it allows the other people in the room or in the discussion to learn more about what that person really means, because they've been invited to slightly enlarge on it. And then, as you say, having done that, if one is the chair or convening, to then ask another person to have the same opportunity, so that it gets more even. But if there is still animosity in the room and challenge, then there are a number of things that one can do. They don't always work, but I don't know about you, but I don't really believe in diffusing anger, because I don't think one can. I think anger has to be appreciated as an evidence of how much that person cares.
Well, I think that one way to diffuse anger, if somebody's angry, usually they feel they have not been seen, they have not been respected, they have not been heard. And so if you listen well, you in the moment are actually giving them something that will address that need right there and then, if you do it well, which will de-escalate it, I think.
Yes, that's true. Some people are so desperate to get their voice heard that they'll go on and on.
Yeah.
But hopefully, it will become more of a discussion that way. Yes.
Scilla, do you have anything to say? I do think that women have a particular role to play here. Then you've done a lot of work about how women leaders stop wars. And you said to me in our correspondence you wanted to talk about that. And I don't know if you do, but I mean, I've been following your work around this, and I don't necessarily think that we know that women are more collaborative than men, although I think we kind of are in terms of our, well, that's a longer conversation. Let's just say that we are. And if we are, or that we've been holding back in terms of being in public life, and that we are, in my view, the largest untapped resource on the planet for coming forward and really, we have a bunch of falsely empowered, entitled 5-year-old men who are running the show. And
Correct.
They got raised by somebody and they got enabled by women. And I will just say, so I don't know. I think that women have a critical role here at this point in time to shift what's happening on this planet. And I don't know I think you agree with me about that. And I wonder if you could speak to that.
Oh, I do. I think it's emerging quite fast now. And that's why I've been watching out to find stories of how women have actually stopped armed conflict. Because when I put that question to my male colleagues, they kind of go, I don't think so. And I've got 6 examples now, some a few years ago. Well, from Northern Ireland, for example, when the Catholic and the Protestant women leaders were brave enough to walk down the street together. I mean, it's hard to imagine how violent the feeling was between Protestant and Catholic. But Betty Williams and Mairead Maguire walked down the main street of Belfast, and I know it well, and they mobilized that way over 10,000 Catholic and Protestant women to march with them. And they did that from 1974 to 1980. For 6 years, they did that. And they won the Nobel Peace Prize for it. And they stopped the conflict. So there's wonderful examples from Kenya. I'm just looking down my list I won't go through them all, Colombia, Philippines, and what you'll remember about women surrounding the military base at Greenham Common in the UK.
Actually, I don't know that story.
Oh, well, there was a very controversial sighting of nuclear cruise missiles being placed at a military base at a place called Greenham Common. And that's not very far from where I live. And I heard the rumor that women were going to come and protest. And I thought, what are they going to do? And this was a long time ago. I mean, it was in the 1990s. So I went down to meet them. I walked 25, 30 miles to meet them and walked back with them to Greenham Common. And when we got there...
That's quite a walk, 25, 30 miles. Good for you.
Well, when we got back to the base, it was entirely surrounded by women holding hands. They were already... the word had got out, and there were over 1,200 women there holding hands, and it was called Embrace the Base. So I thought this is a daft expression, because it makes us look like just soppy women embracing the base. But boy, did the media get it. It went on headlines, not just all over England, but all over Europe. And as a result, these missiles were removed from that base a few years later. So the women managed to achieve what they went there for and what they got, cold, wet and miserable, staying in the rain.
Wow. Could you talk about courage? Because when I wrote this book and when I thought about the big picture of all this, look at what did Carol Gilligan said something like patriarchy creates violence in men and silence in women. And I think, when you think over the millennia, we women we've lost our voices, and we are regaining them, I think, and have been regaining them steadily. In the United States, of course, it's a mess here, I don't need to tell you. But it's scary too. It's scary. I'm somebody who speaks up, but I think, and people say, Jesus, and are you? And I'm like, you look at, I'm a white, relatively affluent, a European white, woman. If I can't speak up, who the heck can speak up? So I think there's been one of the things that's been maybe, I don't know if I can call it exciting, but maybe different than what was going on in Nazi Germany, is that there's a lot of resistance going on here. There's a lot in the United States. There's a lot of pushback on this fascist takeover that seems to be underway, or fascist project, whatever. But it does take courage. And I think for women particularly, we can have a lot of moral gravity, but we need courage to use it. You've been courageous. So I don't know if you would like to speak to that quality, where you've gotten it from.
I come from a military family.
Oh, I didn't know that. Uh-huh.
Yeah, I had four elder brothers.
I did know that.
Two were in the military, and
Okay.
my father was in the First World War,
Uh-huh.
and very, very hardened by it. So I learned
Sorry
courage.
to interrupt you, but when you say hardened, did he ever share, or was he shut down? No, most people at that generation, they did
Never.
not. They never shared.
And he was in the thick of it. So what I learned as the baby of the family was, first of all, I could play up to my smallness. I got carried on people's shoulders, and that was nice, and things like that. But to try and answer what you're saying about women raising their voices, I feel that what's emerging now, and it has done over the past 20, 30 years, is sisterhood. There's a comfort of being able to rely on other women sticking their necks out, if you do. So your courage in stating what needs to be said as bluntly as you wish, it'll have an echo, and there'll be newspaper articles, there'll be television appearances, and so on. And then the other thing which we've talked about is listening, because I think it's really fair to be able to speak if you've already listened. It's a fairness. And then the other thing is the self-belief, and you know that, you've had to go through it, that if you get knocked back, if you get told you're an idiot or a nuisance or stupid or another bloody woman, you know that it's not true. At the very profound gut level that we have, we know that's not true. We know what we're standing on our feet for and raising our voices for matters.
Well, can I push back on that a little bit? In that, even I'm a fairly confident person, but I can't believe sometimes how much I can lose it. And I also notice that living in what I call a patriarchal world culture that I still think is predominant, there's sort of a constant barrage, like, oh, I don't know. I'm a very good driver, Scilla. But, some guy thinks that I did the wrong thing and he immediately flashes the finger at me, it's like, or calls me a bitch, it's like, because he's that kind of insult that is out there in the zeitgeist, that I think a lot of us kind of get a steady diet of it. And I'm a sensitive person, so sometimes I have to and probably all of us are sensitive people. We have to actively say, oh yeah, don't take that in. No, boundaries, don't take that in. That doesn't belong to you. But the need to have confidence, courage. So I guess I'm saying that sometimes I have it on a good day. Most days I have it. And then on other days, I don't.
I think that's true for everybody. And what we benefit from so much is our sisters who are willing to stand with us and lead. And so many of the women I've admired in my 80s now, the women I've admired all these years, have taught me so much in far worse conditions than I have to confront if I raise my voice. They are standing up against situations in Africa and horrible situations in Central Europe now, and they are terrified, many of them, absolutely terrified. But they find the courage that you're talking about through this solidarity, through reading the stories of what other women have done. And there's quite a lot of them out there now, stories and books and so on. And so I think it is changing in our favor very fast, that we feel a bit more confident as women. We don't feel, we're told that we don't matter, so shut up and go home, get back in the kitchen, all that stuff. But I do ask myself, perhaps I was lucky. I was told to shut up a lot by my brothers, but it didn't go in very far, because my mother said to me, remember, she was a very strong, very quiet, but very strong feminist. And so she coached me to not be intimidated.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just reading, I was glad to see that in China, it was an article about Chinese women saying, the heck with you to the Chinese government trying to control their bodies, and saying they're just pushing back on any of that kind of interference. But that came partially from the global Me Too thing that was just, circulating, that I think women around the world are communicating with each other and saying, okay, this patriarchal, what I'm calling a patriarchal world culture, it's global, and we're wanting to shift it because it is connected to a more violent world, to a more oppressive world, a world where we don't have voice. And yeah, we're changing things.
We can do it. Exactly.
We can do it. We can do it. Do you want to say any particular message you want to leave with?
I love this word courage that you introduced into the discussion. And the word courage comes from the heart, and was just cœur. So you can absolutely rely on your heart when you're in trouble. If you get blacklisted or shouted at or stones thrown at you for what you decide to do, ask your heart. I now put my hand on my heart, my hand on my heart there, put the other hand on top of it, and hold it. And it's enormously strengthening, and it takes away the fear. And yeah, you can feel it, can't you?
Yeah.
And that, putting the heart in charge, is it's not just bold, it's absolute common sense. Because the heart knows. My heart knows what I should do much better than my brain.
So you're putting the heart in charge. How do you do that? You literally are communing with it and then letting it lead, letting it communicate with you.
Tell me what to do.
Tell me what to do. Tell me what to do. Thank you, Scilla, so much. Appreciate it so much. Thanks for listening. As always, please like and share, leave a review on the podcast if you can. And if you're interested in more on this, check out episode 31 from the Peacebuilding Podcast. I'll put the link here and in the show notes, where I did my first interview with Scilla. And also, please join a community of people interested in applying collaborative hardball skills in our Zoom conversations. Would love to see you there. You can get more information about this on my website, susancoleman.global. See you soon.